An even a more potentially consequential example was Bernie Sanders' War Powers Resolution on Yemen, which passed both the House and the Senate but was vetoed by the supposedly isolationist President Trump. Could a Medicare for All vote be like those small wins? One extremely important difference is that there are only 118 members of the House that currently say they support Medicare for All. That is about half of the slim majority in a Democratic majority in this 435-member institution. This means, as everyone in the debate has acknowledged, there's no chance whatsoever a floor vote would win. A floor vote would mean that Medicare for All would win in even the modest symbolic victory of winning the House before going nowhere in the likely GOP-dominated Senate. What about Doors and Gray's suggestion that some of the current 118 co-sponsors are insincere, and that forcing them to go on the record would show the left which co-sponsors are truly committed and which wouldn't follow through when it really mattered? The premise is, of course, surely plausible, in at least in some cases, such as Kamala Harris is a prominent Senate co-sponsor. She completely dropped that policy position as soon as she ran for Senate. But yeah, the conclusion hardly really follows here. Like this, the second step of what are we going to do about it, just not there. Like, we don't know. The vote would be 3-1 against if every co-sponsor sucked their guns. Everyone would know this going into the vote. There would be no suspense whatever, even if it wasn't doomed to defeat by even worse odds in the Senate. So why on earth would anyone unwilling to enrage the donor class by actually making Medicare for All a reality, but willing to make the symbolic gesture of adding their name as a co-sponsor, not be exactly equally willing to make the equally easy symbolic gesture of casting a completely, entirely meaningless vote? It would get 118 votes. That's it, because people have already said they co-sponsored it. So, and it's not going to pass. So, what's the big deal? Yeah, it's hard to see why exposing soft yes. It's hard to see, like, in this situation that we could even expose soft yes votes, let alone the merit of doing so in the first place, because it's not like you can even primary them and push them out of the House. So, I guess you could. It's possible in certain situations, but it's not like it's going to be a complete and dramatic effect the way some people have, I think, falsely suggested. Let's take a look at some theories of change here. I think it's very, very important. In case the points gets lost in the discussion of the many, many problems with Dora's idea and his denunciations of AOC's not signing onto it, it's worth emphasizing that a point of agreement between all sides in this inter-left debate is that it makes perfect sense to send a Medicare for All right now. Very, very true. Out of all the social democratic demands popularized by Bernie and the squad, Medicare for All has the broadest public support. And the movement definitely has an opportunity during the COVID-19 crisis to solidify some of that support and use it to politically differentiate ourselves from the liberals. The pandemic has been a giant PSA about the evils of the existing system of private and mostly employer-linked health insurance, because so many people have lost their job and, for no other reason than that, lost their health care. Again, in the middle of a global pandemic. Pretty bad. Anyway, a single day of news coverage that a floor vote would net is really not much of a payoff for such a fight, a massive fight with the Democratic Party leadership. And while Gray points out that the members of the squad are famously adept at making viral moments out of congressional hearing testimony, it's likely the Democratic leadership would allow about 15 minutes of floor debate, and no such viral moments would be really very likely. Gray argues that a floor vote tactic couldn't be ignored by the corporate media if the squad were to coordinate with the activists and protesters who helped organize the historically large mass protest from the summer. I think coordinating for something like that in general, and coordinating for something like Medicare for All in general, and getting those protests in the street, and getting them in for a big way, and getting very serious, large, on the scale Black Lives Matter protests for Medicare for All, that would be helpful. I think that would be worth something, and probably more helpful than a floor vote, because it's so stupid and so symbolic. But if the playback was backed up by organized labor through maybe the threat of a general strike or something like that, or some sort of large organized action, it would be a lot better and a lot more effective. If we had some of the biggest, I talked about this last time, we had some of the biggest nurses unions in the city, like threatening to go on strike, or threatening some sort of action, really organizing for Medicare for All in tandem with people like AOC in the House, and to force that outside pressure. That is the only real way something like this actually gets done. So even putting aside the fancifulness of thinking that a credible threat of a general strike is in the cards anytime soon, with a country with really 6.2% private sector unionization and where those unions that do exist are mostly really in a deep defensive crouch. The problem is that a political landscape in which there was any chance furious mass protests over the failure of Democratic politicians to support Medicare for All would be one in which a lot of the most important obstacles of Medicare for All becoming law had already been overcome. But there are more grounded ways to get the basic message about which side of the ideological divide within the Democratic Party wants everyone to get health care and which side is standing in the way of that. There's different ways to do that. A sit-in on the floor of Congress like the one staged by mainstream Democrats over gun control, for example, would be a pretty dramatic piece of political theater that could actually add to the movement's momentum rather than sending the counterproductive message that Medicare for All doesn't have a realistic chance of happening anytime soon. Because what would the media coverage be? Vote for Medicare for All in the Senate. Vote for Medicare for All in the House. Fails drastically. AOC makes AOC making defensive argument to TV cameras like Medicare for All, doomed policy, not supported by a lot of Americans. Like, that's what it would be. You can't just have the floor vote. You need some other kind of activism. And a great suggestion that I saw on Twitter today was maybe local DSA chapters get like 20, 30 people, go to representatives' town halls and yell and yell and yell about it. Get people pissed off. Say, we need Medicare for All now, and have this happen 40, 50 places around the country. To all those key Democratic representatives who are holding off on it and change the culture and change the debate, make them nervous. Make them afraid. That, and coming to them in those areas where it hurts, those, and with actual people power, is going to be such an important way of getting to the next step in this fight. And it's a fight we'll continue to have and chronicle for you here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. That does it for today's episode of Newsflash. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. We'll see you next time.